Hey guys, welcome to book review number 89, I believe. Today will be reviewing Lost and Found in Russia, Lives in a Post-Soviet Landscape by Susan Richards. Well, anyway, what this book is about is it's about Susan's extended time in Russia, starting at the collapse of the Soviet Union and ending around 2008, around the time of the global economic collapse. But rather than focus on Vladimir Putin or some of the larger historical events, which he does with like short little, not monologues, but kind of intermittent, you know, political updates throughout the book. She really focuses on the lives of four people, or four kind of groups of people, or four couples, I guess you'd say, within the book. One is a um, journalist. I believe her name is Anna. Yeah. And then there's Natasha, who is the wife of Misha. Yeah. Natasha and Misha, who are um, kind of like a burgeoning. I said Anna was like a reporter, and she's kind of like freelance, not married, kind of committed to her work. Natasha and Misha, Misha being a man, are burgeoning businessmen in the post-Soviet landscape. And then it's I guess three families, and then the third family is Ira, I believe. Well, anyway, she's kind of, I'm going to call her Ira, just because. I think it is Ira. Is the kind of a daughter of a well to do bureaucrat. So she's also kind of in publishing, but unlike Anna, who kind of has to live a Spartan existence because kind of she has to make her own way, Natasha and Igor, or yeah, Natasha, Ira and Igor, Misha, yeah, it's Misha and Natasha, Ira and Igor, I believe. Um, I know I'm getting this completely confused, but uh, they are the group that, even though they're in journalism, they kind of live off the dole of their parents, or if not so, at least know that they have a safety net in place. So they're not they're a little just a little more erratic as peoples. They're the ones that move around all the time. Um, but I know that's kind of boring and esoteric. What this book really covers is kind of the suffering of Russians in the post-Soviet landscape, kind of what happens belief-wise when something I'd say equating a state religion is essentially pulled out from under you. Uh, the Soviet Union engaged in what was known as like a shock policy after the fall of the Soviet Union, and that they wanted to, rather than transition into capitalism over the course of time, say like even what maybe possibly like a China is doing now, um, really just tried to overnight change from black to white, from communism to capitalism. And there was a period in the early '90s where just finding everyday basic necessities was a struggle. The lines of, I want to say commerce, but the lines of production or need or transportation were just not there because they had largely just fallen apart. At which case, people like Misha and Natasha kind of become burgeoning transportation people. Of course, with this comes the mob, all the dangers involved with that. This Misha and Natasha were actually not involved with the mob, which was kind of nice. Um, and then, of course, Anna, who is kind of a worn down journalist by the end of the book. I mean, it's really not like portrays any feel good stories. I mean, they're all feel good in that they kind of come to their own um, solace in life, or their own kind of uh, inner worked happiness. I don't know. I don't know exactly how to describe it, but certainly none of them kind of find their dreams and live the life paved in gold, I guess, or truth, or if you're a journalist or whatever they're looking for. Um, it's the main area covered in the book, I should say. That's what I should have started with. Is the Volga River region, and that's kind of where a good chunk of the book takes place in the towns of Saratov, which is like the big town, and then the two smaller towns of Marx and Engels, which are obviously named after Karl Marx and Frederick Engels, I believe, the communist uh, leaders. So it's extra ironic that now that the state is completely doing a 180 from communism, these towns are still named after these leaders or whatever. Um, let's see what else. Oh, Saratov, kind of an interesting story just about the town in general. Is it's not like a huge town, but back during Soviet times, which like I said, this covers from like '91 to 2008. It was a weapons manufacturing place. But because the Soviets were very secretive about it, they also had sort of like a cover or a shell industry of making toy products. And so, actually, when the Soviet Union fell apart, a lot of the military stuff just that went bye bye. But kind of, even though people were working like 20 hours a week or on much lower wages, kind of what was initially a shell industry or just kind of a front, I guess I should say, kind of a front for these weapons manufacturers because the Soviets wanted to keep it secret, kind of provided a way to eke out a living for many people in Saratov, even though they obviously were suffering and just did not have the kind of assurances that they did in communist times. Despite all the things that were messed up in communist times, there were at least some assurances within life. Well, they'll share some assurances in life unless the KGB gets at you, in which case your life is fucked, to put it mildly. Um, what else? She really talks a lot about the Russian countryside. She goes out. There's this. I can't remember what it is now, but there's this famous line of like novels, kind of serial novels that are kind of not trash novels, but just kind of like not high end novels that really romanticize the Russian countryside and particularly romanticize the idea of getting away from civilization, which, of course, in any time period after the giant catechism, that's the Catholic Church, calamity, that's still not a word, the giant clusterfuck that was kind of the transitional phase. Um, Not to say that they weren't eventually going to move in the right direction, though. There's even question there. But at the time period, it was really messed up. So there were these novels came out about living in the countryside, about being self-sustaining, and particularly getting away from civilization, which you can understand why they became popular in such an environment. Let's see what else. She went out to the Old Believer community, which is in the, I want to say, is that the Yermatov? Yeah, Yermatov. I'm looking at the book. Yermatov River in Siberia, and what's really interesting there is kind of the interplay between even in the remotest parts of remote Russia. For people that had not, like, in one generation moved out to the countryside, but for generations during Soviet times, during the Tsarist era, for centuries, had been kind of living in self-sustaining communities out in the countryside. How technology was really coming in. How even though these people kind of poo-pooed technology, people would like a specific story I remember was one family buried a television set, and they did have electricity through a generator. They buried a television set in the ground so that the more restrictive religious leaders wouldn't see it. Of course, the religious leaders kind of knew about it in this Old Believer. Old Believers being a conservative sect of Orthodox Christianity, so just very sort of old school beliefs, Byzantine era beliefs, I guess you'd say. Yeah, so there was just that interplay between, and a lot of them, to get around, they would ride snowmobiles, like in the wintertime. Um, but of course, you have to kind of draw a line because at some point you eventually become a modern society, in which case a lot of the, evils proclaimed by this religious group eventually come to the forefront. There was also another sect that I forget what the name of it was, but it's west of Novosbrook in Kurigingo and Cherishmashanka Mountains. Basically, west or east, excuse me, east because we're going the other direction. East of Novosbrook, west of Lake Baikal in Irakuk, kind of in a remote mountainous region north of Mongolia. And once again, the thing that was interesting was even though these people were like not completely brainwashed, but were kind of like clearly affected in a way that in the West we might call like a cult or something like that. There were some of the few communities that Susan found throughout Russia that were actually maintained and well organized, and were not just becoming dilapidated at kind of this transitional phase. She also went to, I mentioned Novosbrook. She went to Novosbrook, and there's a specific, I want to say it's Armichov. I know it starts with an A, I think. Uh, Town, and it's like the National Research Center of Moscow. Essentially, not really essentially the equivalent of Harvard, because that's probably Moscow University, but maybe the equivalent of like a MIT or a Caltech, where a lot of the technology during Soviet times went. But something that was interesting about Soviet and just kind of Russia mentality in general is how the spiritual plays into the scientific. In the West, we definitely have this idea that the scientific and the religious, an individual can have both, but the idea that the fields themselves would interconnect is actually very taboo. Is just that's not okay. Uh, Whereas here, there were the ideas of connecting to some sort of like larger cosmos, and these were in like physics departments, kind of mind reading machines, some sort of connection to almost like at a molecular level, the way that matter interconnects is also very spiritually connected, which I thought was interesting. To a degree, it's I think it's a little bit of quackery, but I was not there, and Susan said in her book that they put her in this kind of I think it's similar to like a sensory deprivation device, but has like certain magnetic fields. I don't know. It was something that the research department in this kind of hard science really proclaimed, and she said she really did have sort of a not a mind altering like in a drug way, but just sort of like an eye, even though it was all dark, kind of an eye opening experience or a mind opening experience, being part of this. So it shows what I know. I'm cynical about it. I'm from the West. Let's see what else. She predicts the war in the Crimea Peninsula because one of I mentioned Ira, I believe Ira and Igor, which I'm not sure that's 100% correct, but just go with me on this. Moved to the Crimea and actually go to the naval base there, and she sees like people living in caves, which is really strange, like right outside the naval base. It got the kind of feel that like there was money being poured into the naval base. This is in the Ukraine at the time, but being controlled by the Russians. So it was before the war broke out, and essentially that's why the Crimea War broke out, was because Crimea was always to a degree kind of like controlled by Russia post-Soviet Union, but was just kind of nominally under Ukrainian jurisdiction. Now the Ukrainians felt that it was theirs, but it was largely just being run as a Russian subject. Now, obviously, this is kind of going off the book a little, when the Ukraine kind of had their revolution or whatever you want to call it, the Orange Revolution, no, the Yellow Revolution. They kind of moved to the West, in which case the people in Crimea were like, hey, no, we're Russian. We want to be with Russia. And that's why the war happened. Okay, I got to do this more of the review later. All right, bye, you guys.